All right guys, today is the day I've been waiting for. I don't have to grind on the boat. I don't have to sweep up dust. I don't have to throw dust away. I don't have to throw away rotten wood, rotten fiberglass. I can tell you that it feels like I've thrown more of this boat away than anything else recently. We're finally gonna go ahead and start putting new wood in the boat and getting it rebuilt and getting it one step closer to being back in the water and getting ready to use it. Now, if you guys are new to the channel and this is the first video of mine you've watched on the boat, please jump into the playlist, check out the other videos that led up to this point. I'm trying my best to cover everything in good detail, so that way if you need to tackle this project yourself, you have a good resource to see the steps that I took, the problems I had, and what I did to overcome them, and hopefully that'll help you with your project. So today, like I said, we're putting in the wood for the transom. I'm gonna go ahead and pull a template off the back of the transom, get it cut on wood, get it cut to fit. For obvious reasons, I'm gonna need both hands to get this done, so I'm gonna set the camera down and I'll bring you guys back and kind of recap what I did to get there. To make my cardboard templates, I used some cardboard that was thinner than your average cardboard, had it cut in smaller pieces so it was easier to work with, and I was able to place it up on the back of the transom and just press around the corners and get it to conform around the edges of the floor and the sides of the boat. I traced that outline with a razor blade and got it cut to shape. In the areas where I needed to add some material, I taped on some extra pieces, and I took this first template and you can see that I laid it out on a thicker piece of standard cardboard to ensure that I had a good accurate template for the wood that I'm going to use on the transom. My transom is going to be built out of 3/4 inch plywood. Now I am choosing to use marine grade plywood here, and the reasons for that is because it's built with a glue that is much more resistant to water and moisture to prevent the layers from delaminating. And as you can see, it also has much less knotting in the wood and there's more veneers to it, so it's much stronger than your standard plywood. So we have our first rough cut on the transom, and what I'm using is marine grade plywood, 3/4 of an inch in thickness. The original transom in the boat was 3/4 of an inch as well, and I wanted to keep that thickness for strength, mainly because the swim steps that we have on the back of this boat bolt through the transom, and I wanted as much strength there as possible so I don't have to worry about anything. Now, I made the first template, which was a thinner sheet of cardboard that I had, and used that to put it on a thicker one and kind of fine tune it. So I ended up making 2 templates and then tracing the second template on here and cutting it out. Now, one thing I did do when I used that template is I added the 1/4 inch of wood, or I left it there when I cut it on the bottom edge. Now, the reason why I did that is so I can have a better fit with the wood on the transom to the floor of the boat. And I'll bring you over to the boat and show you what I'm talking about. Now, on this, if we're using the floor of the boat as essentially relative, the transom is laying back at about an 18-degree decline on the back side. So if I were to cut that wood out with just a 90-degree cut with that jigsaw, as the wood is leaning back in relation to the floor, it's going to pull the forward edge up, and it's going to give me a big gap. And the gap, I looked at it and kind of eyeballed it, and it was roughly a 1/4 inch. So my train of thought with this is to cut this with the extra 1/4 inch. This is the side that faces the inside of the boat. I'm going to flip this over. I'll use my template once again, line it up on the top and outside edges, which are cut true to the template. I'll trace the line on the bottom, so I'll basically have this line on the back side, and I'll go ahead and cut that bevel. I'll cut it or sand it, whichever seems to work best. So that way, this will be the outside edge, and I'm going to basically take it down and angle it to the line on the back side, hoping that when I go ahead and set this in the boat, that gap on the top edge on the inside will not be there on the bottom. So this is a bit of an experiment, hoping that it works out as I think it will, or hope it will, but won't know till we try it. So I'm going to go ahead and work on getting that cut. And I'll bring you guys back and let you know if I either had success or we failed with this idea. I was able to get the angle needed on the bottom edge of the transom by cutting it with the jigsaw with the blade set at an angle. Now I went ahead and got the blade set at that angle just by trial and error with some scrap wood, making some cuts and fitting it back to the transom floor and making the adjustments that were needed until I was happy with the fit. Once I had everything fit and cut, I went ahead and made my fine-tuning adjustments with my 3-inch die grinder, again with a 24 grit disc on it and a lot of trial and error, back and forth test fitting. So you guys have seen that I've been going back and forth with fitting this in the boat and sanding on it and fitting, but what you can't see from those videos is what I'm doing, the mark on the inside. So you can see that it has a pretty good fit, but I have some areas that are high and some areas where it's resting on. And the easiest way to go through and address this is I have enough height. That's the important part on this. It's still tall on top before it falls into the lip where the old transom was. So I have enough height to sand down material and bring this whole piece down. But all I'm doing is I'm just taking this pencil and I'll lay it flat onto the boat and I'll run it basically all the way down along, and it has the same standoff, and you'll see where the difference in the wood goes, where I'm marking these, where it gets from thin to high. And so is what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll sand to that line, and that's going to go ahead and help close these gaps up. So I've been doing it in a few different shots, and each time I do it, it's getting closer and closer and closer. And it is hard because I am only on the front here, and I have to be sure I get the bevel, that it's not the front that's sitting on, that making sure that it's not a high spot on the back side. So it's just taking it slow, grinding, checking, but eventually I'll get this in here with a nice good tight fit, and I'll get it to fall into this lip up on top. I just wanted to take a minute, stop the work on the boat, and thank you guys for all the positive responses, comments, and likes of these videos. I really appreciate the response you guys have been giving me. If you guys are enjoying these videos and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. It really means a lot that you guys want to subscribe, follow along. Please leave me your comments, and I really appreciate the love, guys. Thank you very much. So I finished fitting and trimming the new wood for the transom, and I have the final fit that I'm going to go with. Pretty good along the bottom, and it's about as tight as I was able to get it. I'm going to go ahead and be using an epoxy to put this in, and it's going to be thickened up quite a bit. So I'm counting on the fact that that's going to go ahead and fill up the gap on the bottom and leave no voids. You can see how my old transom wood actually just came up and curled up over here and didn't even go down in those corners. So I have quite a bit better fit, more coverage, and hopefully it's going to give myself more strength. I already have it fit up top, and I beveled this edge also, so that way when I go ahead and tab it in, it'll be less of a lip after I fill this gap. Now I need to go ahead and pull it out and finish prepping this fiberglass up here, because it's just going to be too difficult to get my grinder in and get that stuff prepped up for the tabbing. So this is one of those areas where a little planning ahead goes a long ways. I can have this wood out, I can prep out and get all this glass scuffed up around the outer edge. And that way when I have this finally epoxied in, I don't have to go back and deal with that when I try to get it tabbed in with the fiberglass mat. If you can look closely, I see I have a bunch of screws here. And let me hop out of the boat and I'll show you what I have going on. Hey, Charles. Hi. So, it's hard to see here, so I don't have much space. But what I've done is I've taken some 2x4s and I set the transom in there. I drilled some small pilot holes into the transom so that way these decking screws could go in. And then I took these 2x4s and over drilled the holes, and what I'm using is these 2x4s to sandwich the wood for the transom tight to the back of the boat. And this is what I'm going to use to go ahead and hold it in place as everything gets cured up and let the epoxy sit so it's pretty good and rigid. I did it this way for a mock-up first and pre-drilled the holes in the wood, because when I'm going back together, I don't accidentally want to run a screw through the fiberglass of the boat. I want to be sure that I'm going through all the existing holes that are back here for the transom housing cover, the swim steps, the exhaust. I used all existing holes here, and I was able to get about probably 30 fasteners in, which is absolute overkill. So what I need to do now is I need to go ahead and get this wood off, get the transom out, prep the inside, and also I need to address the back side of this transom because I need to account for bleed through of the epoxy. and I don't want any of it out here on the exterior of the gel coat, so I have a couple things I'm going to try. No idea if it's going to work, but I'll bring it back when I get that all set up and we'll cover it then. So we have everything back here taped up, and as you saw, I did the first layer of tape was just some blue masking tape, and then I went over it with some actual like HVAC duct tape. Now the reason why I did that is I find that the blue masking tape, less stuff sticks to it, so that was my choice there because I wanted to be able to peel it off nice and easily. And this HVAC tape, it's a lot stronger and resists the flexing. But also I had it left over from a house project and it's just extra laying around. So I used that. And also you saw I put the clear plastic on over the back of the transom cover. That's actually crash wrap that is pretty common in the auto body industry. And I have that, if you've noticed, all over the rest of the boat, so that way I don't beat the gel coat to death while I'm working on it. It helps manage the dust. So I just put that over there so anything that would ooze out would not wind up back here on the transom. Now for all the holes that I was talking about earlier. So my son was kind enough to loan me some of his crafting air dough here, and that is what I used to fill these holes on the back of the transom. So my train of thought on this is it's going to prevent the epoxy from getting in there and leaking through on the back side, which is really all I care about. I don't really care if the hole is sealed shut with epoxy. I just don't want it onto the gel coat on the outside. So I pretty much packed them flush to the inside of the fiberglass of the boat, and obviously there's the tape on the back side holding it all in. I hopefully will be able to go ahead and pull this air dough out from the back side through the holes, but if not, I'm drilling them out anyways. So their only purpose, in addition to the tape, is keeping the epoxy resin from bleeding through and getting on the gel coat on the outside. Now I did set the transom back in here and I did poke holes through the air putty and the tape through the holes in the wood of the transom, so when I'm putting my 2x4s on, I have a hole in the tape so I can get that screw lined up and into the wood. Again, I'm going through a lot of work to make sure I don't sink a screw through the fiberglass and gel coat of the boat. So the last thing I need to do is I need to do the prep that I talked about around the outside edges for my tabbing, and then I'm going to go ahead and get started with epoxy in the wood and the back of the transom, and finally getting this wood back in the boat. Before installing the wood, I applied several coats of vinyl ester resin to the wood. Now I did this so that way the epoxy that I'll be using to bond it to the fiberglass of the boat, it doesn't get dry as the wood will want to soak up that epoxy. So what I'm doing is I'm pre-soaking it with this fiberglass resin, and I'm going back over it after it sets and starts to soak in areas to make sure it has good coverage. I give this enough coats until it seems that the wood no longer wants to suck in the resin, and also be sure to get all your edges and corners so you have good coverage on this. As I mentioned, I chose to use an epoxy to bond the wood to the boat. I chose to use G-Flex 605 epoxy from West Systems. Now to prevent the epoxy from running out and to give it a little bit more thickness, I did choose to use their 403 microfiber fillers, and that gave me the added thickness that I needed with the epoxy, so that way it would hold its shape and stay in place as I place the transom to the boat. This epoxy is mixed at a 1-to-1 ratio. I mixed and used about a total of 32 ounces of this epoxy for this transom, which, looking back, I was just a bit more than I needed based on the amount of bleed out that I experienced, and I probably could have got away with going to 28 to 30 ounces of epoxy for this job. Here you can see that I'm applying the epoxy on the floor of the boat and vertically up along the sides. I'm doing so when I place the wood for the transom in, I can ensure there's no voids back behind the wood. And in order to do this, I did end up thickening the epoxy even further as compared to when I was placing it onto the wood of the transom. Here you can see that I'm just working the epoxy, managing the run out, and trying to get a nice radius around all the corners.
Unfortunately, the epoxy was a little bit too thin to hold the shape on the radius, and I ended up just giving up on this task, deciding to come back a little bit later and finish it off.
All right, we're back in the shop and back on the boat after my work week. And I basically, once I epoxied this in, I just left it alone and walked away. So here we can see what we have as an end result. And I had a little bit more run out than I wanted down on the bottom there at this epoxy. But it's not too bad overall, and I will go back through and clean that up and address it. But I'm more curious to know how it worked on the back with the taping and plugging those holes. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and yank these boards off, and then we'll pull this tape back and we'll see if my idea worked or if it didn't. All right, we got everything off, so let's go ahead and peel this tape up and see what we ended up with. And looks like it worked pretty good. We'll see how easy this dough is to get out. Well, I'd say that was pretty successful. The dough came out all the way and did not stick to the epoxy at all. And I still have my hole. Now I just need to go ahead and drill those through into the wood. I'm going to count that as a win. So, time to peel the rest of this off. We almost made it without any issues, guys. As you can see here, on these two holes, epoxy bled through. Made a pretty big mess, and it's exactly what I was trying to avoid. Now, it did happen here also, down by this exhaust tip hole, and I did take a chisel and a hammer, and I just kind of was experimenting, seeing if I could knock it off. And I was real careful to lay that chisel flat so I didn't get into the gel coat, and I was able to knock a lot of that off, and I think with some color sanding and polishing it'll be okay. So I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna try the same thing up here where it's more visible. Might sit and think on this for a little bit before I decide how to address it. And I have some things back here with the transom and the wood and how I'm gonna cut everything out that I'm undecided on. So for now, I'm just going to continue the work forward with getting the wood and the fiberglass work on the inside of the boat finished so I can get the boat back onto the trailer. And then I'll come back and I can address all that stuff later. But really, I'm pretty eager to get this boat to a point where I can get it out of the shop because it is taking up entirely too much space. Now you can see I went ahead and cleaned up everything on the inside of the transom, and I got all that extra epoxy off and cleaned up. So now I have one more thing to do before I glass this in, and I'm going to go ahead and take that same fiberglass reinforcement putty that I put on behind the transom, and I'm going to fillet all the corners. So essentially what I'll be doing with it is making it so all the corners have that nice radius fillet there. You can see I tried doing that with the epoxy when it went on, but it was just getting too runny on me. So I'm going to go back and I'll pack in that putty into these crevices, and I'll make a nice smooth transition up here, which I already started and I beveled the wood for. So I'll continue that, and I'll get these crevices on the bottom filled and a nice fillet down here on the bottom. And you don't have to use the epoxy that I'm using. You could use a peanut butter mixture for this. And the whole point of this is to A, fill up my gaps, but B, make a nice smooth, easy transition for the fiberglass. It's hard to get it to stick to a sharp 90 degree, so I'm just trying to smooth out all the angles of these transitions. It'll be a lot easier to get this glassed in. So my plan of attack is to go ahead and get that fiberglass putty on there today, and then I'll come back tomorrow and finish glassing in this transom. I'm going to be fiberglassing this wood for the transom in with a piece of 1708. Now I went ahead and traced out the outline with my original template with a yellow highlighter, and then I went and did another outline about 3 inches out with the aid of a compass with the highlighter attached to it.
Now, by tracing the outline of the transom template with a yellow highlighter and then going outward and cutting it out 3 inches wider, it does 2 things for me. It's going to allow me to glass in this transom with enough overhang going onto the parent fiberglass where I'll have lots of good strength. And also the initial line that I marked with the yellow highlighter on the original shape of the transom is going to allow me to lay the cloth down and get it positioned where I want. And the benefit with the yellow highlighter as opposed to a Sharpie is once you go ahead and soak it in resin and get this glassed in, you can no longer see the highlighter. It completely disappears. If you use a Sharpie, it's going to be there forever. Now, I placed the 1708 in dry and did not have it pre-soaked. I did this because I felt it would be a lot easier to work with, and also because I had the lines with the yellow highlighter around where I was going to place this on the transom. I was very specific on how I wanted this to fit, and I didn't want it to start to stretch and pull on me when it was pre-soaked. So it is a little bit more work to go ahead and get this soaked in well and get a good lamination with it vertically when it's not pre-soaked. I was willing to take the time to go about it this way because in the end I felt that it gave me the finished product that I was looking for. It required about 30 ounces of the vinyl ester resin to go ahead and get this initial layer of 1708 wetted in and glassed to the back of the transom. Now, after my main piece of 1708 had cured and set up, I went back and tabbed in the perimeter of the transom with an additional piece of 1708 that was 8 inches in diameter. I was able to go ahead and get this glassed in with a total of 4 pieces. 1 ran across the top, 1 ran across the bottom, and 1 vertically on each side.
Gave the glass a couple days to go ahead and cure up and kick off, and everything's looking pretty good. Getting all the contours and beveling around all the corners and edges really helped out with getting the glass laid out and being able to do it with less pieces and less relief cuts, so that way I have more strength. And for now, we're just going to go ahead and leave the transom as it is and continue working on other areas of the boat. Now, my thinking is I want to go ahead and get all the structure of the boat taken care of, and then I'm going to come back and worry about the cosmetics and functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on the next video. I'll be going ahead and putting the stringers in. I'll be getting them tabbed up nicely to the floor and tabbed up to the back of the transom. And so obviously this nice clear see-through where you can see the grain of the wood is going to change as my layers of glass get built up. It kind of gets that green-blue color. So that's where I mentioned once I'm done with all of the structural part of the boat, I'm going to go through and pretty all that up and make that look as nice as I can. I have a few ideas on how I'm going to do it. I haven't decided exactly which route I'm going to go, but it's going to end up looking a lot better than what we have now. Also, this week, you can see I was finally able to pick up my wood, so I got the wood for the stringers. So guys, please keep an eye on the channel. The next video, we're going to be cutting the stringers and hopefully getting them bedded into the boat. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, give me your comments, hit the like button, and thank you for watching.